Welcome, new and old friends. My name is 242. First, I'd like to tell you that I have started a podcast. If you're interested, look for the podcast called Daydreams and Nightmares with 242. Tonight, I have two scary stories for you, both about a wife. Our first is about a gunman breaking in and making you choose between your wife and son. The second is about a wife being replaced and the horrors that brings. So, turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. It's about to get spooky. Your wife picked up your kids a half an hour ago, sir. I rushed out so fast I didn't tell the school that I didn't have a wife and began to cry as I realized I was finally free of those filthy animals. Decisions by the Prophetic C. He had a stupid fudging smile on his face, so happy with himself, while he held a gun to my wife's head. I tried to yell something so he would take the fudging gun away, but my mouth was taped shut. My hands and feet were bound to the chair with rope. On the other side of the gunman was my son, terrified and crying. "Well, good morning, sleepyhead. I was starting to think I'd have to wake you up myself." He grinned even wider. "You're probably wondering what's going on, or why is this happening to me? And let me tell you, this isn't the time for you to get any answers. In fact, it's me who wants an answer." He moved the hand the gun was in, and now the pistol was pointed at my son. I tried to lunge from the chair, but the ropes kept me in place. My wife began to cry even harder, her eyes pleading for me to do something, anything. So, which one? I was so worried about my son that it took me a second to really hear what he was saying. He wanted me to pick between my son or my wife. I tried to yell, to talk, but the tape held firm. No, you don't need to speak, friend. Simply nod in the direction of the one you want to die. That's all you have to do. If you don't pick in the next 2 minutes, I'll shoot them both. Those are the rules. He set down a little kitchen clock timer on the table in front of me, and it started. It began to tick down, almost painfully quick. I knew there was no way out of this situation, and I looked at my wife, who I had married all those years ago. She looked at me, tears in her eyes, but she knew the choice I would make. I knew that she wanted it too. I nodded to my wife's directions. My eyes stared at the gunman the whole time. He nodded and shot her in the head without hesitation. My son began to scream and cry even harder at the sound and seeing his mother dead on the ground. Without another word, the man went out through the kitchen, and I heard the back door slam. He was gone. I stared at my wife's body for a long time as I heard the sirens in the distance. The police broke through the front door and cut me and my son free, searching the house for clues or anything that would give them a lead. I held my son close to my chest, comforting him as I tried my best to answer the detective's questions. I didn't stop looking at her body until the coroner took her away. It was hours before everything was finished up, and the last of the police left. I took my boy upstairs to lay him down in the room before I thought better and took him to mine. I placed the child next to me and covered him up. I watched him sleep for a while as I pulled out my burner phone I had bought a week ago and turned it on. There was already a message waiting. "I hope the act was convincing enough for your son. I'll be ready for my payout when you get the life insurance check. Thanks for doing business." I turned off the phone and made a mental note to destroy it in a fire pit in the next few days. I'd have to wait to burn her stuff, but I was a patient man. I planned things out. The stupid witch never should have cheated on me. I finished my final perfect pirouette to thunderous applause. If only I could speak and tell the little girl who owned my music box of the living hell I'm trapped in. My wife was replaced by I Stand Catwoman. Darling, you fell asleep at the wheel, my wife told me. Thankfully, I was able to wake you up before we could skid off the road. She spoke with a concerned tone. Yeah, you're probably right, I replied. And I was convinced that was what happened. I must have fallen asleep and dreamed about seeing a bright light in the sky emitting from a huge disc-like object. I mean, how outlandish is that? To think that we had seen some sort of alien spacecraft? Vishkahi and I laughed about it for a while before we went back to unpacking. You see, we were returning home from a road trip. It was late at night and the street was empty. Then suddenly, I saw what seemed like a scene from a horror movie. A light, the brightness of which was unlike anything I had seen before, descending from what looked like a disc-shaped void. That's the best way I can explain it. This disc wasn't even black, but somehow darker and could be easily distinguished from the night sky. It blinded me momentarily, and when I came to, the light was gone, and my wife, Vishkahi, or V as I like to call her, was frantically asking if I was okay. I asked what happened to the bright light. She gave me a confused look and asked what I was talking about. She said that I had fallen asleep while driving and must have had a dream. She took the wheel after that and drove us home, as I clearly in no condition to do so. About a week after the incident, I began to notice that something was different about V. For one thing, she had become sexually insatiable. My wife has always had a great sex drive, but now she seemed to want sex all the time. As soon as she came home from work, she would take me to the shower, then the couch, then the bed, and then the shower again. I couldn't complain, but the sudden spike in her libido did seem a bit strange. We never used condoms as she had had a barolateral salpingectomy years ago. Neither of us wanted children. One night when we had finished several rounds of great sex, we were lying in bed. I had my arm around her and she rested her head on my chest, her back towards the window. I was running my fingers through her silky hair and reveling in the post-coitus bliss, when suddenly my tranquility was shattered. This same light I had seen, or thought I had seen on that empty stretch of road, was now shining above my neighbor's house. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. The blinding light lasted no more than a few seconds before it vanished. It was as if it had never been there in the first place. I turned around to find V standing there looking bewildered. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" she asked back. "The same damn light I saw the night on that road. Come on, don't tell me you didn't see it," I said, exasperated. My wife came close to me and placed a hand on my cheek and told me I was probably tired and was seeing things. I told her again that it was there. She smiled and told me again that there was no light there, that I was just tired and needed to be relaxed. I would have protested further had she not gotten down on her knees and wrapped her lips around my you-know-what. The pleasure I felt bolted out any reflection. By the time I got dressed for work the next morning, I had convinced myself that she was probably right, and I had just hallucinated. Apart from her new sexual appetite, V's behavior changed in other ways as well. She seemed to be growing very distant from her friends and family. I ran into her best friend one day and she asked me if V was okay. She said V hadn't returned her calls or texts. I told her she was probably busy and that I would talk to her. V had been paying for her grandmother's assisted living and made it a point to visit her at least once a week. One evening, V's grandma called me. She was clearly distressed and told me that V hadn't called her or come to visit in weeks. In fact, the last time she had seen V was the day before we left for our road trip, which was over a month ago. The poor woman sounded heartbroken. I told her I was sorry and promised her that I would speak to V about this. That night, after recovering from torrid sex, I mustered the energy to ask V why she hadn't spoken to her grandmother in so long. At first she looked confused, then a look of recollection dawned on her face as she replied, "Oh right, yeah, I'll see her soon." I suggested we invite Grandma over for lunch to make it up for her. I knew for a fact she loved her granddaughter's cooking. Vishkahi agreed. That Saturday, we made lunch for the three of us. I picked up her grandmother and brought her over. V hugged her, as she always did, but there was something off about that hug. I can't put my finger on what it was, it just seemed wrong. As V and I were setting the table for lunch, she knocked over a bottle of wine. And I mean, she deliberately knocked it down. It fell from the counter and shattered. I just stared at V for a few seconds, perplexed. She said it was an accident, but it sure didn't look like one to me. I decided to not make a big deal about it. She implored me to go to the liquor store nearby and get another bottle. On my way to and from the store, I couldn't help but ponder over V's strange behavior. Why had she become so distant from her loved ones? Why did she knock over the wine bottle? And did she actually do that, or did I dream that up as well? Should I talk to her about it, or should I let this slide? Was I overthinking this? As it turned out, I wasn't going to get much peace of mind, regardless of whether I confronted Vashni or not. When I came home from the store, V's grandmother was lying on the floor. V stood over her. The look on her face can only be described as a combo of mild annoyance and amusement. I rushed to Grandma to check on her. She was unconscious. I was about to check her pulse when V told me she had already done that and that her grandma was dead. I was shocked by the coldness in her voice, but this wasn't the time to dwell on that. I called the emergency hotline. The paramedics confirmed that she was dead. We later learned that it was a massive heart attack. I finally asked V what exactly had happened. She nonchalantly told me that Grandma had been walking to the kitchen when suddenly she clutched her chest and fell over. I couldn't get over V's tone. What was wrong with her? She had always been such a loving granddaughter. The V I knew would have been crushed by her grandmother's demise. The woman who stood in front of me seemed like a completely different person, and I was scared of her. I decided to sleep in the guest bedroom that night, in despite of V's attempts to seduce me, and later to guilt trip me into sleeping with her. I lay in bed awake, wondering what the hell was going on. All the evidence points to a completely natural cause for my wife's grandmother's death. Logically, I had no reason to suspect otherwise. And yet, that look on V's face, her tone when she talked about seeing her grandmother drop dead. I was mentally exhausted but couldn't fall asleep. The strangeness that came upon my wife haunted me. The next day, I left for work early. When I came home, V was already home. She was sitting on the couch holding something in her hand. When she saw me, she smiled and held it up. It was a pregnancy test. It was positive. I stepped back. How was this possible? She had a bicep. How the hell did she get pregnant? She smiled, a knowing yet cryptic that sent a chill down my spine. She approached me, and before I could say anything, she spoke. Darling, I know that we agreed not to have children, but I'm going to keep this baby. It's okay if you don't want to be involved. We'll get a divorce, and I'll get full custody. You don't have to pay child support. You'll be free from all responsibilities. She continued to smile at me, as if she was daring me to ask questions, to verbalize the math I was doing in my head, to give her a reason to get rid of me. I said nothing. I simply nodded and stumbled to my car. I spent the night in a hotel room. All of this somehow did and didn't make sense at the same time. That light that I saw was from a spacecraft. Somehow, when I had been blinded, my wife was replaced. The woman, the thing I saw next to me after it disappeared, was not my wife. It was one of them. So was that thing growing inside of her. It may share my DNA, but I felt no attachment to it, only fear. And what had they done with my wife? What had they done with my V? Was she even alive? And was this the beginning of an invasion? The divorce was hassle-free. The house was mine, and I kept it, as V and I had signed a prenup that ensured that she would keep what's hers and I would keep what's mine. And I don't think that thing that looks like my wife was interested in material possessions. I've been spending my time trying to get in touch with people who claim to have been abducted by aliens. I'm just grasping at straws here, hoping against hope to be able to see my wife again. I can't go to the police, as they would surely think that I'm insane. Soon after the divorce, I heard that that thing pretending to be Vashvir had quit her job and was moving to another city. I should feel some relief now that she's away from me, but I don't. For my own safety, I've decided to move away as well. You see, my neighbor, the same neighbor over whose house I saw the bright light, is pregnant. This would not be extraordinary, except she's in her late 40s. Interestingly, her husband died of a heart attack just a few days ago. As the police dragged him away, the madman screamed that his sacrifices were the only things that kept the beast contained. Well, I will certainly miss the easy meal. It will do me some good to finally stretch my wings again. So, what do you think of these two stories? And of course, of the two-sentence horrors? Did they give you the chills? Tell me down below. If you enjoyed this video, then hit that like button and make sure it feels it. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss another video. Remember to check out my new podcast called Daydreams and Nightmares with 242. See you this Thursday for our day stories. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.